Hey beautiful people, my name is Tim and welcome to my favorite place here on YouTube, Draw Too Much, my YouTube channel, where I get to sit down and have a great time with you guys and show you some of the techniques that I use to draw my caricatures and cartoons. Now, today we're going to be looking a little bit more in depth at the app Procreate. I'm in it right now, and we're going to take a look at about how to build a brush that meets your needs. You may find when you come into an app like Sketchbook or Procreate that it has a bunch of cool features in it, but none of them are geared towards what you need. So you find yourself having to get used to the program when you really could build this program to work the way you need it to. So instead of you having to get used to it, it has to get used to you. I'd much rather that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at about how to build a brush in this program. It's not the best intuitive software when it comes to building a brush, but there are a couple options, and I'm going to show them to you today on what you can do just to help you get set up. They use different names and things for key features that you would be looking for. When we want stabilization of brush, they call it streamline. So there's different names for things that you would want that you might not recognize if you're looking through the program. So instead of you having to go through and finagle with all that yourself, I'm going to show you today, and we're going to get you started on the path to building something really cool that's going to help you be able to do a lot better stuff. So we're going to go ahead and start by opening up a brush palette. I just created a new canvas, and you can see I got my brush palette here. If you want to learn more about the software, my very first episode I'm doing on what I use can be found on my YouTube channel. It's just a couple episodes back. It's the very first episode of this whole thing I'm doing here on iPad Pro. And you can go through here. I'll talk a lot more about how to work in these menus and things like that, or what you can expect from these menus. And then from there, now we're in this episode where we're going to go ahead and talk about the brushes. Now, if you come into the program here and you're looking through, and maybe you decide that you like a pencil, like the HB pencil, and you start drawing with it, and then you turn your pencil on its side and it does that thick thing because there's tilt sensitivity also involved in this pencil and in the iPad Pro. Maybe you find you might not like that and you want to change that, or maybe you want to put more stabilization behind it, or maybe you want to change some of the structure or textures of the brush. There's so many options that you can do with this program, but let me help you get started with it. So let's go into inking, because inking is going to be the best way to demonstrate a lot of the different key features that I think you're going to be looking for. And you can see that I've already built quite a few brushes for myself. I have 6 in here that I use for several different things. So actually, we'll say, yeah, 6, because one's also modified. You'll know if this is a brush that you have created, because there will be a little tiny circle with a little tiny brush in the top left-hand corner of each individual square. And you can see that in these all right here, okay, and one down here. A lot of the features that I use can be summed up in a single brush or in 2 brushes. And it depends on what app you're using, because I do find that some things in Autodesk Sketchbook actually do better than they do here in Procreate, and vice versa. So let's go ahead and start with a brush that's already been in here. You can try and create a brush on your own from scratch, but it's actually easier, in my opinion, to take a brush that gets you close to what you're looking for and just gently modify it into what you need. So let's go ahead and grab the studio pen down here, and I'm going to start drawing with the studio pen. You can see that it's great. Looks like it even has some maybe it even has some stabilization in it. Looks like it's got good flow and stuff, but maybe it's just not quite big enough for what you're looking for. Or maybe you're not a fan that it has to start. I mean, I'm pushing my pen down here. I'm touching, and then I pull, and it's not growing this. Maybe you don't like that it actually starts everything and finishes everything in a taper and stuff like that. And there's adjustments that need to be made. These programs work in such a way where you can build this pen to do all these things and more. Sometimes it's overcomplicating, and you just need a good old-fashioned simple brush. So what we can do is we can take the studio pen, we can slide it to the left, and you can see it says Reset, Duplicate, and Share. I'm going to hit Duplicate. And you're going to see that it's going to make a second studio pen, and it's going to have the little circle around it to let you know that that's the pen that you created. The little circle in the top left-hand corner. Now I'm going to click on that and it's going to bring up my menus. Right away we can see that Streamline does have 30%, so that means that there is some stabilization correction. Streamline in this program is stabilization correction. Okay, so if you want to have more stabilization or less stabilization, you'll turn up or turn down Streamline. Okay, spacing is going to take the line and separate it into individual dots. So the closer together you bring it, the cleaner the line's going to be. The further apart that you take it away from itself, the more it's going to turn into cool texture of dots and things like that. And you can probably use this for quite a few different things, but I rarely do, quite honestly. So I like my spacing at 0. Jitter means that it's going to spread out an explosion of dots, and that's pretty cool for its own texture. You're going to be creating your own textures in this. Here at the end of this video, you'll see that we can actually grab from quite a large selection of textures, and we can probably create our own. I haven't done that as well, but they do give you a very large selection of textures that are going to help you out with this as well. But jitter is a very cool tool, especially if you have something that does use texture and you apply jitter to it. It's going to give it a really cool randomized effect. Now, right down here, stroke taper. This is where I think some of these apps are thinking a little bit too hard about this. Basically, when you start a line and finish a line from start to end, you can tell the computer that you want this line to start with a taper on the front and on the back. That's great, but it begins to feel very computerized and not as intuitive. So, you have to create what you want. If you desperately want to have that sharp tip at the end of your drawing line, then turn on some taper. If you want it really obvious and you want it really clean from start to finish, then turn it all the way on. The only issue with that is that your pressure sensitivity that you're trying to get may suddenly start to feel a little unnatural, because this thing is going to focus on putting that taper on first, over focusing on what size your line needs to be based on your amount of pressure that you're putting on your screen. Keep that in mind. But you can see here that I can adjust my start taper and my end taper. So if I turn both of these all the way down and I start drawing, you can see I can push and it's already starting a nice thick tip. And I can come to a nice little taper at the ends with anything. So that's just turning everything on. What did I do? Everything on none. So I basically turned it off. Let me go ahead and clear my canvas here. So, boop, okay. Let's draw a line across the canvas here, and I'm going to do a little bit of pressure. So starting from thin, thick, thin, thick, and trying for a nice taper at the end. Here's a nice taper at the beginning, thick, and let go. And you can see it's just not quite giving you the front and rear tapers that you might be wanting. This feels very intuitive, though. This feels like I'm drawing with my pen. And honestly, if I want more taper, I'm simply going to change my brush size. And I can get more tapered lines because I'm changing my brush size. So I can get more tapers, but it depends on what you're looking for. If you want the computer to do it for you, let's go ahead and turn on some of that brush tapering, and you're going to see what's going to happen. So I'm going to turn it 100%. You can change this, obviously, but watch again now. I'm going to do light pressure and then full pressure. Okay, let me turn up my opacity. Sorry about that. Light pressure and full pressure. You can see I got this amazing taper that's right there, but it's following through, and I was pushing at full force right here. That line should be pretty big. Let's go ahead and try that again. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. So it took this much time to build that taper, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with this line, but if you're trying to fit in small areas or you're trying to do little techniques off this line, like this here, maybe I wanted this part right here to be a thick line because I have that texture, that taper turned on. I can't do that. So I would actually have to go into my studio pen, turn off the taper so that I could get that nice thick line if I need that in that same area. See, if I don't want this little taper and I want it nice and thick, I have to turn that off or I have to turn it down. What I usually do in this scenario is I'll come in here and I'll say, okay, I do definitely want a little bit of taper, but I want it to feel like I just took a brush, like an actual paintbrush, and I just tapped it on the screen and then I pressed. So I want that feeling, but I want it to be still under my control. So what I'll do is I'll put just a little hint of taper on, and I mean just a very small hint. And I might even do it on the back end too, because I do like the back end of my brush stroke to have taper as well. Let's see what happens now. So I got this nice sharp point at the end and at the beginning, and if I do push really hard, I can still, you can see it attempted right here to create that taper point. You can see that. It started like right about here, and it moved forward to the front. So about right there, and it moved forward to the front to create that taper point. So in the same way, you need to make this to work for you. So feel what's natural. You might feel that turning it off completely is more natural. You may feel that turning it on is more natural, but you're losing individuality. I know a lot of artists, including myself, and in some of my first videos that I ever created here on YouTube, I would actually draw in Adobe Illustrator. But Adobe Illustrator is going to take your line and completely computerize it. It's going to remove everything that makes your artwork you. It's going to remove it and make it computerized. That does bother me, because I do want my individuality, if I'm saying that correctly, in my lines to be nice and smooth, okay? And I want it to be, I want people to look at my artwork and recognize me in my line work. You know, and that's important to me. And I think that most artists would want that. All right, let's keep going down the line here. Very, very useful tool. You just got to build this to work for you, okay? Next up below is of opacity. So if I turn on opacity now at about 50% and I start drawing, let's see what happens if anything happens. I'm not seeing anything happening here. And you might find that a lot. Maybe there's an effect somewhere else in the program that's affecting what you're trying to do here. You'll have to mess around with that a little bit. And then size, obviously size is going to play a key factor as well. Now this is all under stroke taper as well, so keep that in mind that what you're affecting here is all within the taper. So let's try this. Let me build up my tapers to full. I'm going to bring up my opacity to 50%, or let's try 12%. And then I'm going to bring my size to 54% and see what happens. Bring up my opacity all the way on my brush. You can see I got some nice fluid lines, but I don't see anything really happening with the opacity. I don't see anything affecting opacity. And you'll find, like I said, you'll find that a lot. There's probably another setting somewhere down the line that we're going to find that's affecting this from doing some more opacity drops or whatever. So let's keep going through here and see what else we can find. I'll leave all this right here as is. It doesn't matter to me. We've talked about what's all in here. Let's just move on to the next one. Shape, once again, you can scatter the brush and you can change it. And you might not be able to see much change in that brush, but I think what it's doing is it's rotating it and altering how the line structure is done. If you were using a shape other than a circle, I use circles for all of my drawings, this rotation would rotate that shape. You can randomize it. And azimuth, I really don't know what that is. I don't use it. I don't know what it is. Let's go to the next one, is grain. Grain behavior. If there was grain in here, and you would notice this if you added a texture to this, and I'll show you the textures at the end of this walkthrough, you would adjust a lot of them in here. Whether you're using a pencil effect or crayon effect or whatever, all that could be adjusted in here. Dynamics. This is going to be a little interesting. Here's where you kind of can create a brush to work as a art brush, like an oil brush or a watercolor brush or something like that. You can tell it how much ink you want to be in the brush at one given time. So if I start drawing right now, if I keep drawing, it's going to keep going, and it's not going to run out of ink until I lift my pen, you know? But if I turn on my fall off here, you're going to see that if I start drawing now, it immediately stops. So maybe I put too much fall off in, so maybe I can drop it back. And you can see as I draw here now, at a certain point in time, I run out of ink. And that's because it's trying to give you the idea that as you're painting with a real brush, oh, I ran out of ink, it's time to dip again. And so it's trying to give you that effect. Okay, let's go back here. And now with that, you can also turn on some settings, and you can dilute and charge your brush, which means how much ink are you putting into it or taking out of it or whatever. I think you change that by turning off glazed. If you turn off this glazing, which if you know anything about working with like oil paints and things like that, glaze is a certain kind of medium, and I don't know much about that, quite honestly. I'm a digital artist, and I focus mainly on digitals. I haven't had a lot of time to do classic art. I know glazing certainly gives a very... Honestly, I would say it gives it a glazed effect. It gives it a more glowy effect when you paint over stuff with a glaze. So, a lot of you guys know about that a lot more than I do. I look at it from a computer and app sense, and you guys probably know a lot more about it from an actual medium. So think about how that would affect your artwork. See if it actually meets the qualifications of what you're looking for. It might not. I mean, this is an attempt to simulate reality, and it might not be perfect. But once again, we can dilute it. So if I turn this on and I dilute the line, if I draw now, you can see it's diluted it with water, basically. And as I draw, it's very much feels kind of wet. And you can try and... I can see this coming in handy for a whole bunch of different stuff. And then, of course, you can even have a few extra seconds there to kind of blend it a little bit. And then I can charge the brush so we can put a little bit more... I think we can put a little bit more paint into it right at the tip. And you can see that kind of happening there. Okay, I'm going to turn glazed back on, and you can see that it does a cumulative and flow. I think this is kind of turning on kind of an airbrush setting. Let's see what happens. I'm going to turn on a cumulative, and we're going to start drawing here. Well, maybe not. I do feel that it is giving it kind of an interesting texture right here at the end. I'm not used to seeing this. And it also is kind of feathering the edge a little bit. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it, but it does have a neat effect. I'm going to go ahead and turn down my flow. Try this again. Let's see what happens. Alright, that's kind of cool. So it's starting much lighter. It's like it's almost diluted. And it obviously spirals off to nothing after a certain point in time because you're still running out of ink. I'm going to go ahead and turn off a cumulative and flow. Obviously, your opacity variance, you can set your speed, you can set jitter, so all that same stuff. So it almost sounds like you could build a very realistic airbrush here, thinking about how much spray and things like that would happen. Usually in programs you do that by just simply turning on a feather. But in this program you can actually build how much spray, if it's got jitter as the spray flattens out or whatever the case may be. So you can build a lot of that in here as well. I'm going to jump back here, and I'm going to make sure that I'm turning everything back to neutral, back to our black pen here. So hang on just a second while I try to remember what adjustments I've made, because I would like to continue to teach this tutorial with the same brush that we had originally started on, as I'm still demonstrating it to you. Okay? So I still got some kind of crazy setting going on here that I'm not realizing. Okay. Oh, flow. Sorry. There you go. So my flow's back up here. There we are. All right. So next, coming back in here, we're going to jump over to the pencil settings. Here's where you are setting pressure sensitivities and things like that. That's all done here. So if I want to change my opacity of my pencil through the pressure of my pencil, here's nice and soft, and then here's hard, and then here's soft again. Now, that's really, really a great tool. I would strongly suggest using it. But if you're doing inking, you're not going to want this effect per se. You're definitely going to want something a little bit more... that's all hard line. So that's where I would come in here and I would say, okay, I want my opacity. You can either do it on the back end or on the front end, or you can do it and at 50%, which is basically off. And you can see that it just stays thick and full all the way through, which is pretty cool. Size, you can adjust your size on the back end. So if you want it to start off thick and then get thin, and I think the opposite here, thin to thick. So there you go. And it's still trying to read pressure sensitivity. And then also, of course, if you maybe want to do some softness to it, if you want it to have an airbrush effect, you can do that as well. And you might not notice it, but it does feel kind of really fuzzy. If I zoom in here, you can see that some of the pixels on the outside have a grayed feather look on the outsides in these areas. And that's probably what we're seeing there. So let me zoom out. I am sorry, this whole tutorial, I'm full of hiccups. Okay, now, if you are using tilt, if you are using the idea of drawing on the side of the pencil or whatever, which I don't personally, you can set those things up here. How it affects the angle, the opacity, and the size. You can set all that if you want in the tilt of the pencil, which is quite useful for, I would say, for people who have a little bit more of a nature of wanting to draw like this. And wanting to see that they can get the thickness of the pencil when they're drawing like this. Because you know a lot of those classic artists, they actually prefer to draw on canvas in this nature. And I can find that being very helpful because when they want to get the full pressure of the side of the pen or pencil, they can do that in drawing like that. And this is an amazing, amazing tool. I like this more than I like my, where is it? My Wacom Cintiq pen, which is right here, which does have some pressure sensitivity, but it does not feel at all like this one does. And this one just feels like a stronger build, quite honestly. Okay, so you change all those angles and opacities and sizes under the tilt function. Next up, we're going to go into the generics. I don't know what Orient to iPad screen means. I don't know if that's how you stand at the screen or whatever and how that line reads to those functions. Stamp preview, you can turn that on, and I don't think that has any effect. I think that's mainly if you're running textures and things. Let me go ahead and hide a couple of these lines. I'm going to turn these off. Size limits. I use this constantly. It seems like this program has built different brushes for different purposes. And so they do one brush that's more specifically for inking. So even at full strength, I'm pushing full strength here, you can see it's not a very, very big line. And if you're using this brush to color something, that's going to take you forever to fill this in. And if you're a traditional and you don't want to do the fill bucket tool, then obviously this is going to take you forever. So what you can do is you can come here to your size limits and you can do whatever size you want. Now when I do this, you can see that that's a much thicker marker kind of base. And it works very, very well. And it will color things in, and you can see there's some opacity in there as well. So some of our settings from our previous things that we've been doing so far are obviously playing a toll here. Which I think is kind of cool. So that's all food for thought as you're doing your stuff here. But I'm just coloring this in here, and you can see that it's nice and thick. And you can set, obviously, the low end and the high end. You can make this so it doesn't have any pressure sensitivity at all. Or you can make it so that it has all pressure sensitivity when you're doing this. And it's a very, very, very useful tool to be able to choose what size you want this brush to be. So that way you're not painting little areas with little lines that you didn't choose to do. So I can set my minimums here, and you can see that it changes the taper on the, well, excuse me, that's the opacity, sorry. Here you go. So you can see it's changing the taper of that as I choose to do that, and it's going to make it even bigger if you go this route. So I think it will anyway. So there you go. Now that means that on the low end, you're not going to be drawing into tiny areas as easy. If you want to get from a... here, I'll show you this. Let's say that I want to color in an area that's right in here. Okay, but I want to do it with a different color. If I try to go in here and I try to color, you see that I can't get in there so well. Now obviously you'd probably do it on a different layer, blah, 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 blah. But if you want to build a brush that kind of meets your needs a bit more, turn on some of your size limits so that the minimum gets pretty small, and then you'll have to adjust your brush size accordingly so that your biggest point is still nice and thick, but your smaller point means that you can get in here and you can get more detailed coloring in the inside here, and that's going to help out a lot. And then of course pushing full force, you can get the same brush size or whatever in there. Okay? Alright, next is the opacity limit. Same thing as before. You're going to be able to choose how much opacity is built into the brush on the low end, on the high end, So maybe you want to do max at one and I think minimum at the other, or maybe we'll tone it down just a little bit. So you can get different tone values. And it's kind of helpful if you're trying to build up textures or if you want to look a bit more like a marker structure. And you'll mess with certain things and you find it might not make a difference at all. I'm trying to explain things to you and I go, I'm not really seeing much of a difference there. Until you go into other settings and you adjust them, and then you come back and you adjust these, and then these change those, and everything affects each other. So you may find you want to do an effect here, but maybe something else that you've programmed in one of these other boxes is affecting it some other way. Okay, let's jump into the final one here, and this is where I was talking about building textures. If you want to do a shape, you can click here and you can go to Pro Library, and you can see there's quite a few options that you can choose from on what you want to draw with. So say you want your starting shape. Let's do this. Let's do water bleed. Okay, if I draw now, it should have that water bleed effect. And when you paint with it or brush with it, it'll carry that water bleed effect through. Now, if you want to add a bit more texture to it, and then you come over here to Grain Source. You go into the Pro Library, it brings up all the same stuff, but you can see that there's also some textures in here. Let's see down here. Brick, wood, sketch paper, pastels. Let's do one that's painfully obvious, cubes. So now I'll go ahead and draw, and you'll see the cubes will make themselves known here. And you can go over top and alter it. But I have found that this has been quite useful for me. Like, for instance, let me go into my gallery here and find my image of Tyrion Lander. Tyrion. I forget the last name. Lannister. Excuse me, Tyrion Lannister. And you can see that I actually made a brush here, and with a single stroke, I was able to put in this texture on his jacket or his shirt, whatever you'd call it. And it was a very, very useful tool, very helpful to kind of get that texture in there. It worked very, very well. And you can set all that stuff up. And then, of course, with the settings that you put in there, you can change your pressure sensitivities, you can change your textures, your tones, all of that stuff. I mean, to build a brush for yourself to get it exactly the way you want, you can really make some very cool things with this program. So that's going to do it. We're at about 30 minutes here. So thank you so much for watching my tutorial. I'm going to bring Tyrion back up because I know everyone likes him. And thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Please remember, I do have a Patreon account, and thank you to all my amazing patrons for all of your support. I know that there aren't many rewards in there right now. I'm still trying to think about what kind of rewards I can do. And I'm really struggling to find a way to give you guys advanced tutorials when at the same time I do these kinds of tutorials talking about things here. It's just a very, very fine line. It's a very difficult, constant battle. So I ask you to continue to bear with me. If you want to get advanced tutorials, I have them on my drawtoomuch.com website. You can go take a look at that. And they're really great. They're low cost, and they do have a bunch of great information that'll teach you guys how to draw caricatures, cartoons, illustrations, and all that sort of great stuff. I just haven't found anything new to update in those because, honestly, I want to share it all here. So it's a daily battle. But if you could also go to my Patreon, and if you donate, I think it's at the $5 value, $1 or $5 value, you'll get all my advanced tutorials completely free. And if you just scroll down, you'll see that I've given you a code to go in and download them all and everything like that, all for free, and it's going to be really great. And so you donate now as I make these YouTube videos to help get those. Also, we have a really awesome page on Facebook, Draw Too Much on Facebook. Look me up there. It's kind of my Facebook fan page, if you will. And then also there's an awesome group in there called Draw Too Much AA, or Artists Anonymous. And we have a bunch of cool people in there. We all share our artwork, and we talk about what our day is going on about, what's happening, and we have some really great artists in there, and it's really great to see what everyone's doing in there. And that group is growing slowly, but the people that show up in there just add to it, and this place is coming to life, and it's a lot of fun to hang out with people in there. And I hope that you enjoy being with us in there. So I think that's about it. Follow me on Facebook at Draw Too Much. Follow me here on YouTube by getting subscribed. Hit the like button. Let me know what you think below in the comments. And you're welcome to hit the dislike button if you didn't like it. There's nothing wrong with that. Wouldn't mind knowing why, though. Leave a comment in the comment box below if you feel any negative about that. Just make sure to keep it clean, because we do have a lot of people who watch. Thank you so much for hanging out. I will see you guys next time in another video where we will continue this conversation about how I draw in my amazing iPad Pro 12.9 inch, also works on the 9.7 inch, and all this stuff is to help you make your way towards success drawing for a living. It's really cool. God bless you guys. I'll see you guys next time in another video. Bye.